Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I thought it would be fun to chat about the decks that I want to work with in 2021. But first, let's do a little recap of the decks that I said I wanted to work with in 2020. So the first deck that I said I wanted to work with was the Solera Occulti Tarot, and I did end up working with that deck quite a bit at the beginning of 2020. It's a deck that I really love and really enjoy working with, and of course I've modded it, so I love it even more now. The next deck that I said I wanted to work with was the Wild Unknown Archetypes deck. Now, I did work with this deck a little bit, and then I kind of struggled with it because it was round. Me and round decks, we don't get along. So I ended up trimming it down and making it more of a square-ish type deck. I do have a video of that on my channel if you want to check it out. And I did end up working with that deck quite a bit alongside the Wild Unknown Tarot, which was really wonderful. So the next couple of decks that I said I wanted to work with were the Pearls of Wisdom Tarot, the Synchronicity Oracle deck, and the Story cards. Now, I really did enjoy working with those three decks. I enjoyed my time with them, but I felt like I had some decks that already kind of fit that same bill in my collection, and I wasn't finding myself using those three decks because I was always kind of going back to my old favorites for that. So those ones I did end up passing along. So the next deck that I said I wanted to work with was the Saki Saki Tarot, and that was one that I actually never got around to in 2020. That's one that I'm like on the fence of whether or not I want to keep it or not, because I do have decks that I really enjoy that I feel have a kind of similar energy and vibe. And so I'm kind of waiting to see if that's one that I'm going to end up using in the new year or not. The next deck I said I wanted to work with was the Minoan Tarot, and that's definitely one that I did use in 2020 and really did enjoy. I love all of Ellen Lorenzi Prince's decks, and I think I have them all now. So the next three decks are actually decks that I said I wanted to work with in 2020 and just never gotten around to. These are all decks that I still intend to work with at some point. The first is the Tabula Mundi Tarot. Now this one is Thoth based, and I just haven't really dove into my Thoth studies. So that one hasn't happened yet, but it's definitely still on my list of things that I want to eventually really dive deep into and to study. The next one is the Mother Peace Tarot, and that's again just another one that I haven't really gotten to. I do have a lot of reference materials for that book, or for that deck that I've collected, so when I have the time, again, another when I have the time. And the other one was the Wild Messengers Alchemical Tarot. Now this is one that I think my hesitation with this one is I'm just, the cards, the deck itself really doesn't thrill me that much. There's not a lot to the decks. It's very minimalistic, but I hear the guidebook is amazing. And so I really do want to dive into it, to study it, and to see kind of what all was going on in those cards. And maybe that will help me make a better connection to the deck itself. So the next few decks that I said I wanted to work with are actually decks that I worked with quite frequently all throughout 2020. That is the Mysteries of Mary Tarot, the Dark Goddess Tarot, and the Dark Days Tarot. So those three decks ended up actually becoming quite pivotal in some of my moon work that I do and some of my sort of divinity goddess Mary studies. The last two decks that I had mentioned that I wanted to work with in 2020 were the Dreamkeeper's Tarot and the Devas of Creation. Now both of those I worked with a little bit in 2020. I feel like I haven't quite really gotten into the Dreamkeeper's Tarot. That was something that I did really want to kind of dive deep into, and I just haven't had the chance or hadn't had the opportunity to do that one. So that one is still kind of on my list to be working with. And the Devas of Creation I did work with quite a bit, and eventually ended up passing on. It really is a beautiful deck, but I found that like after my kind of initial burst of work with it, once I first got it, I found it really just sat on the deck, and I was kind of tended to pull some other oracles that I have that I guess I just work with a little bit more closely, a little bit better. And so I felt like that deck really needed to find a new home so that somebody could use it and love it. That was all the decks that I said I wanted to work with in 2020. I was quite ambitious, I guess, for 2020, where I thought I was going to be. Now, I did end up working with the majority of the decks that I just said I wanted to kind of work with, but I didn't really end up doing the deep dive study into any of the decks that I really had intended to, but that's okay. There's always time for that later. So let's flip the camera around and we'll talk about some of the decks that I want to dive into in 2021. So one of the decks that I worked with that wasn't actually on my list of decks I wanted to work with in 2020 is the Queen Alice Tarot. Now this has definitely become one of my favorite little decks. I've put it back in order because I'm actually doing a sort of deep dive walkthrough with this deck, and it's been a really fun process. I started it, I want to say maybe late spring, early summer, but I could be wrong. And I started working through the Alice Tarot according to the stories rather than the tarot structure. And the reason that I put it in discs was so that I could do that. And then if I wanted to, if I decided that I needed to rearrange it, I could, because I can take these pages in and out and move them around. So right now, the structure is following the story of Alice from chapter 1 through both books. And so you can see here that I'm actually starting with the Three of Wands. And what I've been doing with this is basically paper collaging the around the cards and writing the sections of the book where I find that it relates to the cards themselves. Now, I do want to note that the structure that I'm following is the one that Sadhana put up on her channel. So I'll be sure to link her videos below because she did some amazing videos on the Queen Alice Tarot. I'm not all the way through this yet, so I do still have quite a bit of work to do on this particular journal. But this deck is one that I just absolutely love. I'm really enjoying my work with it. Like I said, it's back in order so that I can do this process, but I have used this deck quite a bit in 2020. I do really enjoy reading with it. It's got such a great, wonderful and playful energy, and it's one that I am really looking forward to finishing up my kind of book work and study with throughout hopefully 2021, and maybe being able to finish that up. However, I'm definitely not rushing the process. I'm kind of allowing it to unfold and do work on it whenever I feel the need to connect to the energy of Alice in Wonderland. So another surprise deck that I ended up working with or starting my process with in 2020 is the Ophidia Rosa Tarot. This is a deck that I think just takes time and effort to get to know. The first time I had this deck, I was like, I don't know what's going on with these cards. I don't get anything from them. It completely fell flat for me the first time that I bought this deck, and so I actually sold it. Now, a while ago, sometime in 2020, I just felt the call and the connection back to this deck, and so I did end up getting it. And I ended up getting the 2 oracles as well. This deck is beautifully produced. I love working with it, but I think that this is a deck that really takes time and effort to get to know. And for this particular process, what I'm doing is kind of including the little quotes that are in the little booklet that comes with this. It's a very poetic deck. And that's where I'm finding my connection with this deck, is through the poetry. And then I'm also writing my own sort of line of poetry for each card. So you'll see here that I've taken those lines of poetry that I've written in relation to each card, which is based on kind of my own intuitive response to the cards themselves, and blending that with the poetry that's in the guidebook. I'm basically writing a poem for the tarot using this deck. So that's kind of where I'm going. Every few cards I have this a sheet where I've written the few cards, the poetry, the lines from the poetry there. That's when this deck kind of started revealing itself to me, when I stopped trying to make it fit within a bubble, and I really began to explore it in the way that it was intended, which is really through the artwork and the poetry. And that has been really key to helping me to kind of unlock this deck and to really be able to utilize it as an actual tarot. Because like I said beforehand, it felt really flat for me, but now I'm actually able to make this really kind of beautiful creative connection with it that I am really enjoying. So that is definitely one that I am looking forward to continuing my work with into 2021. So more recently, I started doing some deep dive work into the Hush Tarot. And this is one that I didn't really expect to, first of all, ever buy, and second of all, ever to really dive deep into. So this particular deck is beautiful. The artwork is absolutely stunning, and I love the kind of really earthy, almost kind of life and death nature of this deck. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I love the artwork, but what kind of tripped me up was the structure of the deck, meaning the artwork that had been applied to each individual card. Sometimes I can really see it, like the tower here. But there are other times when the artwork that was chosen in the deck really kind of missed the mark for me. And so every time I saw it on videos or on walkthroughs, I was really not sure that this was going to be a deck that I was going to be able to work with. But I found that after, for one, actually just working with it, it's kind of a deck that surprised me. But what's really been helpful is actually diving deep into each of these cards and kind of trying to understand why the artwork was chosen to represent the particular card that it was. So I've basically started a deck deep dive with this, and I have created this little journal, and this one has been, again, another sort of really slow growing journal. Even though I am working with this deck quite a bit, I am just doing the study part of it really, really slowly. So that's kind of my process I've been doing with the Hush Tarot and where I'm at with this particular deck. I am really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying using it for daily readings. I'm really enjoying working with it in general. I really do like the imagery. It's a little bit on the creepy side. There is a kind of life and death to it, which I think, you know, that change, that death and rebirth. And I think that that's really a really interesting motif. And I really like kind of diving into that. And of course, it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful deck. So I'm really enjoying my work with it, and I am really looking forward to kind of continuing the deep dive that I've been doing with it. It was kind of an impromptu deep dive. It was totally an impulse purchase. For one, it wasn't a deck that I had planned on buying or a deck that I had planned on working with, but it's one that once I got it in hand, there was something there. There was a connection, and I just needed to kind of dive into it to explore it more. So I'm really looking forward to doing that more in 2021. So while I don't want to get too ambitious in creating this gigantic list of decks that I want to work with, although that worked out fairly well for me in 2020, I really just want to focus in on a couple of key decks that I really want to study and get to know in 2021. So one of the decks that I would really like to explore a little bit more in depth in 2021 is the Tarot of the Holy Light. Now, this is actually a deck that I've had for a couple of years, but I've never really dove deep into it. I had the guidebook on Kindle, and I did give it a read through a couple of different times. It is just chock full of really great information, but I found when working with the actual decks, it's so much easier to have an actual printed guidebook. So this is a really fascinating deck, and I am really looking forward to kind of diving deep into these images. The artwork is a little bit on the, what I would call a little bit on the garish side. It's not in particular really my art style, but I do think they're quite lovely, and I really do appreciate the talent and the beauty that goes into these cards. But really what kind of interests me about this deck is the all the symbols and the sort of esoteric nature to the cards. So in the guidebook, and this is a chunky guidebook, look at this thing, you know, almost 500 pages. There is quite a bit of information for each card, and I'm really interested in looking at all of the different elements and correspondences that are going into these cards. So here we see for the cards, we have the astrological association, we have where it is on the tree of life, we have the essential and the angelic dignities. And I think that's really fascinating. Like I said, I have read this guidebook before on Kindle, and I really just think it is so chock full of wonderful information. I'm really looking forward to kind of exploring it more in detail along with the cards. Before I only had, you know, I was just kind of referencing the black and white images that are in the deck or in the book, but I'm really excited to actually dive deep into each of these and really learn more about what is going on inside of these cards, and also just all the different correspondences that are layered into this particular tarot. So I'm actually really excited about that, but I feel like that's kind of really a deep dive one that I need to do. I'm kind of, you'll see, although I do still really want to work with the thought system and like my tabula mundi and things like that, I kind of feel like this deck and the next one that we're going to look at are kind of like a great transition into some different systems. This, I don't believe necessarily follows one particular system or another. I think it's a little bit of a mix, if I can remember. And so I thought that that might be a good place to start. Just kind of diving deep into expanding my tarot knowledge and expanding my way of seeing the tarot as a structure and each individual card on the whole. So that is the Tarot of the Holy Light. So similar to that, we have the Tarot of the Spirit. And again, this is another deck that has a beefy guidebook. I've had this deck for quite a long time, and I've just now gotten a chance to really get the guidebook, or really I just now bought the guidebook, and I kind of feel like I'm more in a position to be ready to dive into this particular deck. I do believe that this deck follows a little bit of a sort of thothier interpretation, but don't quote me on that because I haven't actually worked with it yet. I really like the imagery in this particular deck, and I've had it set aside for a really long time to actually do the deep work of really getting to know these individual cards. And then I discovered that there is this beautiful, gigantic guidebook that goes along with it. I mean, look at this thing. So we're at another, you know, almost 400-page guidebook. This, again, has a ton of information in it, and it's one that I believe does follow a little bit closer to the, as you can see here, the elemental associations. I do believe that they work the tree of life in, because if I remember correctly, there are certain things in this deck that were painted or created to correspond with the different areas here. And so it has this little card that you can, this little plastic thing that you can overlay over the cards to see where those areas intersect, which I thought was really interesting and definitely something that I'm looking forward to checking out more. But again, this is another one that I feel is just, there's so much information in here that I feel like this is a deck that would just really benefit from that kind of deeper study, that really diving into the guidebook, and then also really deeply exploring the cards. So this is one that I kind of intend to create, you know, another journal for, to kind of follow my tarot bound process and to dive deep into this one. Again, I think it has a little bit, or some thothy influences, it has a little bit of Thoth influence. I do believe it could be completely based on the Thoth for all I really know, because I have not really dove into this yet. But I thought this, along with the Tower of the Holy Light, might be a good kind of bridge between those systems, and then maybe that will kind of get me ready for working with the Thoth. I know that Nina from Shuffled Tarot had said something similar, and she had been working with this deck. Now she's doing a wonderful Thoth series, which I will definitely be checking out when I'm ready to kind of tackle that system as well. And I do believe she had mentioned that this was a great transition deck, so I'm kind of looking forward to working with it in that way. So one of the decks that I bought when I sort of fell off my depth year wagon and binge purchased a bunch of decks, was the Herb Crafters Tarot. Now this is a deck that of course I've seen all over the place, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous deck, but it definitely dives into these sort of herbal elements, and that's something that I've always kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about, to really dive a bit deeper in. And so I thought this deck might actually work as a really great, almost study deck to learn more about each of these herbs, and to be able to use the cards in association with that as well. So my kind of intention with this one is to really kind of use it as an herbal study. I love the artwork. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I may yet trim it because it's a bit large for me. And I hear that the guidebook, although I haven't actually read it, has some really wonderful information. And I feel like for somebody who's really kind of just dipping their toes into the world of herbs, I mean, I do have a very basic knowledge, but I feel like this is a good really starting off point for kind of getting to know a wide variety of herbs. And I love that it associates it back to the tarot, because that makes sense for me, right? That might help me to make better connections with the herbs themselves and their uses and purposes. And so I'm kind of looking at this one as almost like a study deck for right now. And then hopefully I will, you know, have a great connection with it and then be able to just, you know, or want to use it for tarot readings. And I may find that as I'm doing my sort of herb study with it, I may end up actually using it for tarot as well. So we'll see how that kind of comes about. I'm kind of planning this for like more of the spring, just because my plate is really full at the beginning of the year. So maybe this might be a great spring deck to really, you know, dive into these beautiful images and these lovely herbs. I think that might be a wonderful spring thing to do, a wonderful spring practice to have. And so that's kind of where I'm intending to start, or when I'm intending to start with this. So again, kind of another impulse buy. I'd seen it everywhere. It happened to be on sale, and I was retail therapy shopping. So this one ended up in the cart, and I'm really looking forward to actually working with it though, because it is actually quite stunning. And the little bits that I've kind of gleaned from the guidebook have been really helpful. So I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into that. So that is the Herb Crafters Tarot. So the last deck, which is probably going to be the one I'm actually going to start with in 2021, is the Witch's Wisdom Tarot. Now, this is a deck that I have been super excited about because I have all of Phyllis Currat's other books, and her books have kind of been a staple in my own personal practice. They're kind of where I learned from in the very, very beginnings of my personal practice a long time ago, and I was so excited to see that she was coming out with a deck. And I absolutely love the artwork by Danielle Barlow. It's absolutely beautiful. It does come in this great big box, which is quite pretty, but you know, I don't keep my decks in boxes. And this time they've included a bag. I might end up making my own, but this is a really nice touch, a really beautiful bag. So one of the reasons why I kind of have waited to work with this particular deck is because this is a deck that does change up the tarot. And I think it's a deck that, again, would benefit from some deep study because things are different. I do believe the majors are in reverse order. I'm not entirely sure of the rest of the structure. I've kind of tried to avoid watching too many videos on this deck because I really kind of want to just dive into it myself and really get to know it kind of just through my own lens, and then through the lens, of course, of the author and artist. And then hopefully at that point, when I feel a little bit more comfortable with the structure and the system, I do like to go back through and see what other people have had to say about it and their interpretations, because I always take away something new. So I will definitely be watching walkthroughs of this deck so that I can kind of learn from other people as well. But for my initial start with it, I've really tried to avoid too much of influence from other people so that I can really dive deep into it and sort of make my own connection to it. And I think that's just going to be so much fun. I'm really looking forward to this one. And I've kind of been not putting it off, but holding off until I could really start fresh with the new year. Because again, this is one that I'm really looking forward to working with. I'm so excited to have this deck. I do want to do probably some more in-depth videos on it. I have only really kind of thumbed through the guidebook, but I love Phyllis Carot's writing, and so I'm really excited to actually read this book cover to cover, which I tend to do with my guidebooks anyway, but because this deck does take a different structure, I really do want to give it some time and attention so that I can really dive deep into that structure, really learn it, understand it, and then of course create my own connection with it. And this artwork is just stunning. I absolutely love it. I'm so excited to work with this one. This is, I think, out of all the decks that I have that I'm planning on kind of working with in 2021, this is the one that I am like the most excited about. I can't wait to get started on this one and really dive deep into it. And I would love to kind of also work with some of my books by Phyllis Carot where I have, because I've had them for many years. And so I've done a lot of highlighting and things like that. So I'm curious to see if there are elements that kind of match up or that I could pull in to kind of really tie all of that together. So I thought that would be a lot of fun. But I think of all of the decks, this one is the one that I will be working with first. It's the one that I'm most excited to get to know, and that's the Witch's Wisdom Tarot. So you can see that I'm trying not to be too overly ambitious with what I plan to sort of really dive deep into and to study in 2021. I do want to finish my work with the Queen Alice Tarot, the Ophidia Rosa Tarot, and the Hush Tarot as well. So that kind of adds 3 more decks into my rotation. And kind of funny that you put those 3 with this 4, we get 7. That's my birth card. That number keeps coming up for me pretty much on a consistent basis, and it's just kind of funny that the decks that I've kind of earmarked for deep work in 2021, that there's 7 of them. So, you know, all those little synchronicities are always, I think, really fun to look at. So again, the decks that I'm going to be diving into are the Witch's Wisdom Tarot. This is, again, most excited for this one. Really looking forward to it. I'm kind of thinking I'm going to start the year off with this. Because seasonal things, right? That's how I do. I'm looking forward to working with the Herb Crafter Tarot, kind of thinking maybe that's a great spring deck for me, and probably continuing some of my work with my Ophidia Rosa. For summer, I'm thinking maybe the Tower of the Spirit. That might be a good time to really dive into that one. It does feel like a kind of fiery type of deck to me, where I kind of associate that with the summer months, and so I feel like that's maybe a good one to dive into in the summertime. And then coming into the fall of 2021, I would like to kind of start exploring the Tower of the Holy Light. I do feel that it does have a bit of a fiery energy as well, but I feel like it's a little bit more as almost ethereal as it seems. It does feel very grounded, and it feels like very grounded in esoterica, if that makes sense. It's very grounded in the ether. That totally makes no sense, but in my head, it tracks. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I really love to be able to have like one good deck that I'm really kind of studying and sinking into for each season. So coming into the beginning, which would kind of really, especially in my area, winter really doesn't happen till January. So starting in, January, working with the Witch's Wisdom, moving into the spring with the Herb Crafter, the summer with Tower of the Spirit, and the fall with Tower of the Holy Light. That's kind of my plan. We'll see how that all works out. And if I have some extra time, there are a couple of decks that I would like to deep dive into that I mentioned that I didn't actually get to in 2020. That would be things like the Thoth, the Tabula Mundi, and the Wild Messengers Alchemical Tarot. Both of those are decks, or all 3 of those, I guess, are decks that I would really like to study at some point, but I'm kind of really wanting to focus on these ones first. and then move into those later on. So that may be maybe 2022, or maybe just intermingle those in as I have time. I feel like even though I'm kind of just down to 7 decks for study for 2020, or 4 main ones, 1 for each season, they do feel like they are very weighty decks. And so I do feel like there's going to be a little bit of intense work with them that I think should be really wonderful, but will require a good deal of time and energy and work from me. But I am really looking forward to it. So that was a look at some of the decks that I have started to work with in 2020. Hope to continue to finish up my work with in 2021, as well as a couple of other decks that I've brought into my collection or have already had that I really want to focus on in 2021. I always hope that kind of putting them out here into the world is kind of like stating my intention with them. Kind of just put it out there in the universe. This is what I'd like to do. I would love to know what decks you thought you were going to work with in 2020, but maybe didn't end up working with, or maybe did. And I'd also love to know what decks you're planning to work with in 2021, so feel free to make a video or leave it in the comments below. Thank you for joining me today. You will find links for the decks featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.